Makes me sad to think we'll never get to read all the books we really want to read. AI is so lucky. If only we were immortal.
Let's shortcut this book with spoilers. BookQuotes Remix is for those with existential angst seeking the essence of a book without necessarily reading it. Although I highly recommend you actually read this one. Because today we're reading James by Percival Everett. This book is in discourse with The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. We see Jim's point of view as a devoted husband and father. James is clever enough to give the reader an insight into the slave's mindset in a way that feels raw and real, but also compassionate to all sides, often in a way that's so ironic it's funny. Big shout out to the channel Ben Reads Good, linked in the description. Check it out. Ben gives an intelligent, spoiler-free review of the book, and he outlines its main themes very clearly. He says he feels like he may have just read a future Pulitzer Prize winner, so that's really cool. The book opened with page 9, quote, "Those little bastards were hiding out there in the tall grass. The moon was not quite full, but bright, and it was behind them, so I could see them plain as day, though it was deep night. Lightning bugs flashed against the black canvas. I waited at Miss Watson's kitchen door, rocked a loose stepboard with my foot, knew she was going to tell me to fix it tomorrow. I was waiting there for her to give me a pan of cornbread that she had made with my Sadie's recipe. Waiting is a big part of a slave's life. Waiting and waiting to wait some more. Waiting for demands, waiting for food, waiting for the ends of days." End quote. James is self-taught and well-read, and he shows the reader how things are not always what they seem. He teaches his daughter and the neighborhood black children to hide their intelligence by dumbing down their speech in front of white people as a necessary way for them to stay safe. Page 23, quote, "That evening I sat down with Lizzie and 6 other children in our cabin and gave a language lesson. These were indispensable. Safe movement through the world depended on mastery of language, fluency. Papa, why do we have to learn this? White folks expect us to sound a certain way, and it can only help if we don't disappoint them," I said. "The only ones who suffer when they're made to feel inferior is us. So let's pause to review some of the basics." "Don't make eye contact," the boy said. "Never speak first," the girl said. Lizzie looked at the other children and then back to me. "Never address any subject directly when talking to another slave," she said. "What do we call that?" I asked. Together they said, "Signifying." Excellent. They were happy with themselves, and I let that feeling linger. End quote. James and Huckleberry met in seclusion on Jackson Island to hide out, each for their own reasons. And while tending the campfire, James gets bit by a rattlesnake and falls into a delirium wherein he ponders life and his education. Page 48, quote, "Then I was in Judge Thatcher's library, a place where I had spent many afternoons while he was out at work or hunting ducks. I could see books in front of me. I had read them secretly. But this time, in this fever dream, I was able to read without fear of being discovered. I had wondered, every time I sneaked in there, what white people would do to a slave who had learned how to read. What would they do to a slave who had taught other slaves to read? What would they do to a slave who knew what a hypotenuse was, what irony meant, how retribution was spelled? I was burning up with fever, fading in and out of consciousness, focusing and refocusing on Huck's face. The philosopher Voltaire put a fat stick into the fire. His delicate fingers held the wood for what seemed too long a time. He looked at his blackened fingertips. "I'm like you," he said. "How is that?" He wiped his hands on his pants, left smudges. "You shouldn't be a slave," Voltaire said, sighing. He sat beside me, moved to feel my forehead with the back of his hand, and then thought better. "Like Montesquieu, I think we are all equal, regardless of color, language, or habit." "You do you?" I asked. "However, you must realize that climate and geography can be significant factors in determining human development. It's not that your features make you unequal. It's that they are signs of biological differences, things that have helped you survive in these hot, desolate places. It's those factors that stop you from achieving the more perfect human form found in Europe. Is that right? The African can easily be trained in the ways of the European, of course. He can come to be more than he naturally is, to learn those manners and skills that will allow him to become equal. Yes? This is what equality is, Jim. It's the capacity for becoming equal. The same way a black man in Martinique can learn French and so become French, he can also acquire the skills of equality and so become equal. But I repeat myself. I hate you, I said through my fever and chills. You realize, of course, that I have been bitten by a snake, only to have you come to me in this delirium. Well, yes, but all men are equal, that's my point. But even you have to admit the presence of, shall we call him the devil, in your African humans. Voltaire adjusted his position and held his hands to the fire. You're saying we're equal, but also inferior, I said. I'm detecting a disapproving tone, he said. Listen, my friend, I'm on your side. I'm against the institution of slavery of any kind. You know that I am an abolitionist of the first order. Thank you? You're welcome. You do not believe that humans are inherently bad, I asked. I do not. If they were, they would kill as soon as they could walk. How do you explain slavery? Why are my people subjected to it, treated with such cruelty? Voltaire shrugged. Let me try this, I said. You have a notion, like Reynal, of natural liberties, and we all have them by virtue of our being human. But when those liberties are put under societal and cultural pressure, they become civil liberties. And those are contingent on hierarchy and situation. Am I close? Voltaire was scribbling on paper. That was good. That was good. Say all of that again. End quote. James gets Huckleberry dressed up like a girl and sends him off in the canoe to go get information about their families. When James is alone on the island, he realizes for the first time in his life he has paper and ink. He writes his own first words, careful to be certain they were his words, not something he'd read from his master's library. He writes, page 55, quote, I am called Jim. I have yet to choose a name. In the religious preachings of my white captors, I am a victim of the curse of Ham. The white so-called masters cannot embrace their cruelty and greed, but must look to that lying Dominican friar for religious justification. But I will not let this condition define me. I will not let myself, my mind, drown in fear and outrage. I will be outraged as a matter of course, but my interest is in how these marks that I'm scratching on this page can mean anything at all. If they can have meaning, then life can have meaning. Then I can have meaning. End quote. On the island, James has plenty of time to read, which allows him to reflect on society at large. Page 90, quote, I had already come to understand the tidiness of lies, the lesson learned from the stories told by white people seeking to justify my circumstance. I appreciated Voltaire's notion of tolerance regarding religious difference, and I understood, as absorbed as I was, that I was not interested in the content of the work, but its structure, the movement of it, the calling out of logical fallacies. And so after these books, the Bible itself was the least interesting of all. I could not enter it, did not want to enter it, and then understood that I recognized it as a tool of my enemy. End quote. Another time on the island, Huckleberry leaves for a side adventure. James wonders how bad the beating was for young George, who had stolen a pencil from his master for him. And among other things, his thoughts wander. Page 102, quote, closed my eyes, and when I opened them, I saw a gaunt but not too tall figure walking out of the water toward me. His angular face might have been distinguished, but I reserved such valuations for after I'd heard someone speak. "If it isn't John Locke," I said. "James." I knew I was dead asleep and dreaming, but I didn't know whether John Locke knew that. "I've been thinking about you," I said. "I've been pondering hypocrisy." "Don't start up with that now," he said. "It was a job. After I wrote the Constitution for Barbados, the Carolinians asked me to write them one too, and I wrote it." What you're saying is that if someone pays you enough, it's okay to abandon what you've claimed to understand as moral and right. "When you put it that way," he said. "When I put it that way, what?" "They wanted a constitution that would justify their behavior. If I hadn't written it for them, someone else would have. What in the world would be different if that had happened?" I looked at him. "You tell me," I said. "Some might say that my views on slavery are complex and multifaceted." "Convoluted and multifarious." "Well-reasoned and complicated." "Entangled and problematic." "Sophisticated and intricate." "Labyrinthine and Daedalian." "Oh, well played, my dark friend." "Jim, Jim!" Huck's voice split the air. Locke disappeared back into the water. End quote. James learns the fate of young George. Page 150, quote, "There was a lynching upriver," Easter said. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. "Guess what it was for?" I wasn't going to guess, and Easter didn't expect me to. I raked my brow with my forearm and looked at him. "A pencil." An ice-cold spear hit the back of my stomach. "A what?" "A pencil. Can you believe that? A slave was accused of stealing a damn pencil, and they hanged him dead for it. They didn't even find the pencil on him. What's a slave need a pencil for? Can you believe that?" It's hard to believe, all right. I could feel the pencil in my pocket. I was taken then by the fact that I thought of it as the pencil and not my pencil. It's a horrible world. White people try to tell us that everything will be just fine when we go to heaven. My question is, will they be there? If so, I might make other arrangements. Easter laughed. I laughed with him. End quote. James finally makes it back to his hometown, only to discover his wife and daughter have been sold to a breeder plantation. Page 287, quote, "That night, under a gibbous moon, I waded and swam across the muddy channel, rations, notebook, and pistol wrapped in a bundle and held over my head. I would not be returning to Jackson Island. Night felt like a different animal, its own season. My voice, even in my head, had found its root in my diaphragm, had become sonorous and round. My pencil had more firmly grasped the pages of my newly dried notebook. I saw more clearly, farther, further. My name became my own." End quote. James hikes for days to get to the Graham farm where his wife and daughter are enslaved. In a wild culmination of events, with the distraction he created by setting the master's cornfields on fire, he frees all the slaves on that plantation, and he and his family run to escape. Page 303, quote, "As happens with the frightened and unprepared, we scattered. Some of us would be caught, some of us would be killed, probably some of us would go crawling back. Sadie, Lizzie, and I made it north to a town we were told was in Iowa. Morris and Buck remained with us. The white people didn't seem happy to see us, but there was a war on. It had something to do with us. The local sheriff met us in the street and regarded us suspiciously. 'Runaways?' he asked. 'We are,' I said. 'Ain't a you named Nigger Jim?' I pointed to each of us, Sadie, Lizzie, Morris, Buck. 'And who are you?' 'I am James.' 'James what?' 'Just James.'" End quote. Okay. It was fun to see dumb white people get what they deserved. And as a big fan of Nietzsche, I love the way Everett called out the white man's religion as being no help to the slaves. What do you think? Are we ready to have that conversation in open society? If you care to tell me in the comments, I will eventually read it, unless I don't get my immortality wish, in which, well, I plan on reading your comment if you leave one. Would you also like to be immortal so you can read more books? Hey, thanks for sticking around to the end.